In this video, we are going to present some fundamental financial concepts and the cost-volume profit analysis, also known by CVP analysis. Initially, some fundamental concepts. The most common profit of a company is turnover. Usually, we call it revenues or sales. Costs are also an important issue for organizations. There are several examples of costs or expenses in a company. For example, direct and indirect costs, cost of goods sold, depreciation, overheads, personnel, costs of the capital, etc. Another important concept is the income. It is obtained subtracting the costs to profits. Here we can see an example of a very simple income statement in which we can find profits and costs. At the bottom of this financial statement, we have the net income. An important classification of costs is to divide them as fixed or variable. Fixed costs are the costs that do not vary with the number of units produced or units sold. Some examples are rents, depreciation, or fixed salaries. Variable costs are the ones that vary with the number of units produced or units sold. Some examples are the raw materials, variable salaries such as commissions. An important concept that enables us to have a strict control of the business profitability is the contribution margin. It is the amount by which revenue exceeds variable costs. Unit contribution margin is the difference between unit selling price and the variable cost per unit. Contribution margin ratio is obtained when we divide contribution margin per unit by unit selling price. To clarify this important concept, let's make it practical. Consider a unit selling price of 90 euros, a variable cost per unit of 36 euros. What is the unit contribution margin and what is the contribution margin ratio? The unit contribution margin equals to 90 less 36, which totals 54 euros. The contribution margin ratio is 54 dividing by 90, which is equals to 60%. In this table, we can see an example of the use of the contribution margin concept for three lines of products. Line 2 has more sales, but it has also the highest amount of total variable costs. Line 1 has the low level of sales, but the amount of total variable costs is the second highest. Line 3 is the most profitable either in absolute or relative terms, especially because it has the lowest amount of total variable costs. Now let's jump to the CVP analysis. Cost-volume profit analysis is a simplified management tool, but very important for short-term decisions. This management tool also enables us to calculate the break-even point. This is the point in which the total of revenues are equal to total costs. At this point, there is no profit or loss. But there are some assumptions we need to consider. So, constant sales price, constant variable cost per unit, a constant total fixed cost, a constant sales mix, and units sold equal to units produced. As previously said, total costs are the fixed costs plus the variable costs. In a simple way, these variable costs can be obtained multiplying the unit variable cost by the number of units. Also, in a simple way, total revenue is obtained multiplying the sales price by the number of units. Now, let's see the CVP analysis chart. To illustrate the cost-volume profit analysis, we need a two-dimensional chart where the horizontal axis represents the physical units and the vertical axis represents financial values. First, let's represent fixed costs. As we can see, fixed costs are represented as a horizontal line parallel to the x-axis. Now let's see variable costs. In terms of variable costs, an oblique line is designed that got its start in section 0.0 and extending increasingly to the right. In this case, we see that as we increase the number of units, also increase total variable costs. A new line that represents the total cost includes the sum of fixed costs with variable costs. Thus, the total costs are represented by a line parallel to the variable costs, starting with the value of fixed costs. Finally, to represent total revenue, the line begins in section 0.0 as it happens with variable costs, but has a greater slope to ensure that the contribution margin, represented by the difference between revenues and variable costs, is always greater than 0. After the lines drawn representing the total costs and revenues, we get an intersection point where the total costs are equal to revenues. This point is called the break-even point, and we can say that it is represented by the critical value and the critical quantity. If the company produces or sells above this critical amount, it is in a profit area. If the company produces or sells below this critical amount, it is in a loss area. Thank you very much for seeing this video.